The day my mother looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't come back here unless you have something to show for yourself," I was sitting on the floor of her kitchen, holding a cardboard box of my things, wearing the same clothes I had on for 2 days straight. I had just been fired. I had nowhere to go, and my own mother, the woman who carried me, who pushed me into this world, who used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings while the gospel music played in the background, told me I was not welcome in her home. I had $50 in my wallet. $50. The coins rattled in my coat pocket the whole Uber ride away from the house I grew up in, and I remember pressing my face close to that window and watching it disappear. The flower boxes she kept on the porch, red geraniums every summer without fail. The little wind chime I made her out of seashells in 3rd grade, it was still hanging there. 20 years later, still hanging there. I didn't cry. I just watched it go. And somewhere in the back of that car, somewhere between the sound of the driver's radio and the cold February air leaking through the windowsill, I made a decision. A quiet one, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just settles into your bones and stays there. And that decision changed everything. Not just for me, for her. My name is Ashley Monroe. And before I go any further, if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because this channel is where real stories live. No filters, no highlight reels, just the truth about what people go through and what they build on the other side of it. And if this story moves you, and it will, hit that like button too. It costs you nothing and it helps more people who need to hear this find their way here. Now, let's go. And I need you to stay with me for this one, because this is not just a story about money, and it is not just a story about success, and it is not, I want to be very clear, a revenge story. It is a story about what you build when you have nothing left to lose. It is a story about what it costs to love someone who only knows how to love you conditionally. And it is a story about a link. A single link I sent in an email that shattered my mother's entire understanding of who I was. Stay with me. Let me take you back. Not to the firing, not yet. I need you to understand the world I grew up in before any of that makes sense. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, right in the middle of the country, which felt fitting because everything about my childhood was right in the middle. Middle class enough to have expectations, tight enough that every dollar had a name on it. My mother, Diane Monroe, was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately became the axis everything else rotated around. Tall, immaculate, the kind of sharp that doesn't need volume because the precision does the work for it. She built a catering and events company from scratch in the late 90s, back when she was still married to my father. It wasn't a big operation, maybe 15 employees at its peak, mostly working weddings and corporate luncheons and the kind of church banquets that needed 100 pounds of macaroni and a woman who could manage chaos without losing her composure. But it was hers, and she was proud of it the way some people are proud of a scar. Not soft pride, fierce pride, the kind that says, "I made this out of nothing, and nothing is going to take it from me." My father left when I was 11. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but I will say this. After he left, something in my mother hardened, like a fruit left too long in the cold. The softness didn't disappear all at once. It calcified slowly, until what was left was structure and expectation and the absolute refusal to be seen as anything less than fully in control. She raised me and my younger brother Marcus with one operating philosophy. You work, you produce, you succeed. There is no other acceptable outcome. Struggle is a character flaw, poverty is laziness wearing a sad face, and anyone who needed help had simply not tried hard enough. I know how that sounds. I know. But here's the thing about growing up inside that belief system. You don't hear it as cruelty. You hear it as love in its most rigorous form. You hear it as preparation. You think, she is making me strong. She is making sure the world doesn't eat me alive. And maybe some of it was that, but love that only shows up when you're performing well isn't love. It's a performance contract. And I spent the first 27 years of my life trying to fulfill every clause. I was a good student, solid, not spectacular. I'm not going to pretend I was some prodigy. But I was driven in that way that children of high-pressure parents learn to be driven. Not from pure passion, from the low-grade anxiety of knowing that coming home with anything less than excellence was going to require an explanation. I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in information systems, first in my family to finish a 4-year university. I remember walking across that stage and looking for my mother's face in the crowd, and when I found it, she wasn't crying the way the other mothers were crying. She was nodding, slowly, with this expression that said, "Good, now the real work begins." I landed a job right out of college at a mid-sized tech company in Chicago, a software firm called Meridian Digital. I was 23 years old. I had a little apartment in Lincoln Park, and I thought, finally, I have done the thing. Finally, I am the person she wanted me to be. I called her the day the offer came. She said, "It's a start. Don't let them underpay you just because they think you're grateful. Not congratulations, not I'm proud of you, not baby, I knew you could do it. It's a start." I laughed it off. I filed it in that cabinet in my brain, the one labeled "Things Mom Says That I Am Not Allowed to Feel Hurt By." I had been filling that cabinet since I was about 12 years old. By the time I was 27, that cabinet was overflowing. I worked at Meridian for 4 years, got promoted twice, built a solid reputation in product management. I had a 401k and renter's insurance and a standing desk. And every time I came home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, it was like walking into a quarterly review. How much was I making now? Had I negotiated? What was my 5-year plan? Marcus was seeing a nice girl from Cincinnati. Had I thought about settling down? Because a woman needed to think about these things strategically, not like men did, but like a woman with a plan. She said, build something, the way other mothers said, be happy. And I was trying. Lord knows I was trying to hear it as love. But love with conditions attached isn't love. It's a contract. And in the winter of my 27th year, I was about to default on every term. Here is what happened at Meridian Digital. The company had been struggling. Not crumbling, not visibly, not yet, but struggling in that particular corporate way where everyone can feel it, but the meetings still happen and the Slack channels are still active and nobody says the actual words out loud. The product I'd been managing, a B2B workflow tool for mid-sized companies, had stalled out. We'd pivoted 3 times in 18 months. Leadership was rotating, and then they brought in a new VP of product named Craig Holloway, who came in from a competitor with his own agenda and his own team, and very clearly his own list of people he intended to keep. I was not on that list. I found out on a Tuesday morning in February. HR called me into a conference room. And I always notice this. Have you noticed this? They always put you in the rooms with no windows for these conversations. Like they're afraid you might look outside and remember the world is still going. A woman named Patricia slid a manila folder across the table and said the words, "Position elimination, effective immediately." I remember looking at her hands. She had very neat nails, pale pink. And I kept staring at those nails, because if I looked at her face, I was going to come apart completely, and I had made a decision somewhere between her saying effective and her saying immediately. I was not going to cry in that room. I signed the paperwork, I packed my things into a box, the same box, by the way, that would end up in my mother's kitchen a few weeks later. I took the elevator down to the lobby. And I sat on a bench outside the building for 45 minutes. February in Chicago, in a coat that wasn't quite warm enough, watching the street like it was a movie I didn't understand. I was 27 years old, no job, a lease that expired in 6 weeks, savings that could float me for maybe 3 months if I ate at home and stopped pretending I could afford brunch, and a mother in Columbus, Ohio, whose very first question, I knew this with the certainty of 27 years of knowing her, would not be, "Are you okay?" I called her anyway, because she was my mother. Because something in me still believed, the way a child believes in things long after the evidence has stopped supporting it, that if the situation was bad enough, she would just be mom, that the performance contract would get set aside and she would just be the woman who used to put her hand on my forehead when I had a fever and say, "I've got you." She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. I got laid off today." Silence. Not the kind where someone is absorbing difficult news and figuring out how to help. I know that silence. This was different. This was the silence of calculation, like a cash register running. She said, "What did you do?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" What did you do? As if it was settled already. As if my having been laid off was conclusive evidence of a crime I had committed. I told her it was a restructuring, position elimination. She said, calm, flat, like she was reading a verdict. She said, "Companies don't restructure their best people out." I went quiet. She said I needed to move fast, that I couldn't afford to be idle, that she had not raised a daughter who fell apart when things got hard. I said, "I know, Mom." She said, "I raised you better than this, Ashley." I said, "I know." And I got off the phone, and I sat with that for a while. Because something in me still believed, the way a child believes in things long after the evidence has stopped supporting it, that if the situation was bad enough, she would just be mom, that the performance contract would get set aside and she would just be the woman who used to put her hand on my forehead when I had a fever and say, "I've got you." She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. I got laid off today." Silence. Not the kind where someone is absorbing difficult news and figuring out how to help. I know that silence. This was different. This was the silence of calculation, like a cash register running. She said, "What did you do?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" What did you do? As if it was settled already. As if my having been laid off was conclusive evidence of a crime I had committed. I told her it was a restructuring, position elimination. She said, calm, flat, like she was reading a verdict. She said, "Companies don't restructure their best people out." I went quiet. She said I needed to move fast, that I couldn't afford to be idle, that she had not raised a daughter who fell apart when things got hard. I said, "I know, Mom." She said, "I raised you better than this, Ashley." I said, "I know." And I got off the phone, and I sat with that for a while. 3 weeks later, when it was clear my apartment situation wasn't going to solve itself, I flew home to Columbus. I told myself it would help to be around family, that some distance from Chicago might clear my head, that I just needed a few weeks to regroup. I had been there 4 days when it happened. The morning it happened, I had gotten a rejection email. Third one in 2 weeks from a company I'd actually wanted. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop trying to redraft my cover letter, and my mother came in to make coffee, and she looked at my face and she asked what was wrong. And I made the mistake, the fundamental error of telling her the truth. I said I was struggling. I said it was harder than I expected. I said I was scared. She set her coffee cup down on the counter, not hard, just placed it deliberately, like she was setting something down so she could deal with something else. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, and I have replayed these words so many times that they are grooved into me now, like a track worn into wood. She said, Ashley, I love you, but I cannot have this energy in my house. I built everything I have by refusing to be a victim of my circumstances. I will not sit here and watch my daughter fall apart at my kitchen table. If you're not going to get yourself together, then I need you to go figure it out somewhere else. Don't come back here unless you have something to show for yourself. I stared at her. She held my gaze. I got up. I went to the guest room. I packed my duffel bag. I called an Uber. I went back to the kitchen to get the box of things I'd brought from Chicago, and she was standing at the stove with her back to me, pouring her coffee like nothing had happened, like I was just running an errand. I walked out the front door. The wind chime made a little sound as it opened, and I got in that car with $50 and no plan, and I watched the flower boxes disappear. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not because I need you to be angry at her, not yet, but because I want you to understand what that specific kind of rejection feels like. The rejection that comes from someone who is supposed to be your safe place. It doesn't feel like anger, not at first. It doesn't feel like heartbreak, exactly. It feels structural, like a support beam has failed, like the floor is not where you thought it was. That's what I felt in the back of that Uber, like gravity had changed, and I had to learn very quickly to walk in a new kind of world. I'm going to be honest with you about the weeks that followed, because I've heard enough of these stories that skip directly from the fall to the triumph, and I don't believe in that. The hard part is part of the story. You deserve the real version. I couch surfed. First, at my college friend Simone's apartment in Columbus. She had a 2-bedroom, a pull-out couch, and the specific kind of grace that some people carry naturally, the kind that doesn't make you feel like a burden for needing it. She let me stay for 2 weeks with no questions about timelines or exit strategies. The first night, she fed me pasta and let me cry. And the next morning, she handed me coffee and said, "Okay, what do you actually want to build? Not what jobs are you going to apply to, not where are you sending your resume. What do you actually want to build?" And that question, 4 words from a woman in pajamas in a Columbus apartment, did something to me that I can't fully explain. It was like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for years. Because the truth was, and I had never said this out loud, not to anyone, not even to myself in the quiet. The truth was that I had been building someone else's vision for 4 years, executing on someone else's roadmap, serving someone else's idea of what the product should be. And the whole time, I had been carrying something in my own pocket that I never let myself look at directly, an idea. I had been working in B2B workflow software long enough to see a problem nobody was solving. Small service businesses, landscaping companies, catering operations, cleaning crews, contractors, they couldn't afford the big enterprise platforms, and the cheap alternatives were genuinely terrible. There was a massive gap between what these businesses needed and what existed for them. They were afterthoughts, discount bin customers that no serious company wanted to build for. I had a composition notebook, the black and white kind, the ones that cost $1.50 at the drugstore, where I had been filling pages with ideas about this problem for almost 2 years. Features, user flows, pricing models, business structure. I had been doing it the way you do something you don't fully admit to yourself, quietly, at night, in coffee shops when I was supposed to be doing something else, like a secret I was keeping from myself. Sitting on Simone's pull-out couch with $50 and nowhere to go, that secret stopped feeling like a hobby. It started feeling like the only real path forward. I spent 3 days consuming everything I could find about building something from nothing. Y Combinator's free resource library, solo founder communities, a small business development center in Columbus that offered free consulting hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I found developers on forums. I read case studies until 2 in the morning. And then I took honest stock of what I had. A laptop, 4 years of product management experience, Real experience, not theoretical. A network of people in the tech world who respected my work, no dependents, no lease, no overhead. And this is the part I want you to really hear. Nothing left to lose. Because here is what nobody tells you about hitting the bottom. The fear changes shape. My whole life, I had been afraid of failing my mother's expectations. That fear had been a hand around my throat for as long as I could remember. But she had already told me I'd failed. She had already cast her verdict. She literally put me outside her door. So what exactly was I afraid of now? The worst thing had already happened, and I was still standing, which meant, for the first time in my entire adult life, I was free. I registered an LLC with $49 of that $50. I named the company ClearPath Technologies, and I went to work. I wasn't a developer, but I knew enough to prototype in no-code tools, and I knew exactly who I needed to call. A developer I had worked with at Meridian, a guy named Jordan Park, 25 years old, brilliant in that quiet way where he didn't need anyone to know it. I sent him a one-page overview of the idea on a Thursday afternoon. He called me Friday morning and said, "This is the thing I've been waiting for someone to build. What do you need from me?" He came on board for equity. No salary. We shook on it over the phone. We worked for 6 months building a prototype. I lived at Simone's, then moved into a studio apartment for $650 a month when I landed a part-time product consulting gig that covered rent and food. Every dollar I made beyond those basics went back into the product. I did not call my mother. She did not call me. I thought about her every day. I want to be honest about that too. Not always with anger, not always with bitterness. Sometimes just with this ache. The quiet, shapeless grief of loving someone who cannot see you clearly. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I put it into the work. Month 7, we got our first paying customer, a landscaping company in Dayton, Ohio. Owner's name was Beverly Okafor. She was running her entire operation out of handwritten forms, a spreadsheet she updated manually twice a week, and a binder that she carried everywhere like a lifeline. She tried our platform and called me personally 3 days later. She said, "I cried. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that. I sat down at my kitchen table and I cried because I have been doing this the hard way for 9 years and I didn't know it could be easier." I am telling you, that phone call meant more to me than every promotion I ever received at Meridian. 3 more customers came the following month, then 8 the month after that, then 15. Word of mouth, real word of mouth, the kind that happens when you solve a problem that actually matters to people and they go tell their friends because they can't help it. I made a deliberate choice early on to stay invisible. No announcements, no LinkedIn updates about pivots and lessons and the hustle. I had watched too many founders perform success publicly before they had actually built anything, and I didn't want that. I wanted to build something real before I said a single word about it. And if I'm being fully honest, I did not want my mother to hear about it. Because whatever I was building, I needed to build it for myself first, not as a message to her, not as proof of anything, just mine, completely, purely mine, built from a $50 starting line, in silence, without her voice in my ear telling me whether it was enough. So I went dark, and I built. By the end of year 1, 60 customers, enough revenue to pay Jordan a real salary and bring on 2 more people. By the end of year 2, over 300 customers, a seed round from a Columbus VC firm, a team of 11. I moved into a real apartment, bought a used car, got health insurance. These sound like ordinary things. They were not ordinary things. Each one was its own private victory that I celebrated quietly, alone, in the knowledge that I had built it from nothing but an idea and a notebook and the stubborn refusal to let the bottom be the ending. It was around this time that my brother Marcus called. We'd been in loose, careful contact. He was cautious about getting caught in the middle between me and Mom, and I understood that.
He told me her catering business had been struggling. COVID had gutted her big contracts. She'd never fully recovered. She'd had to let most of her staff go, down from 15 people to 3. I listened. I asked if she was physically okay. Was she eating? Did she have what she needed day to day? He said yes. Okay personally, but the business was in real trouble. I said, keep me posted. And I hung up and went back to work. I need you to understand something about that moment because I know what some of you might be reading into it. I was not sitting in my apartment waiting to gloat. I was not building toward a confrontation. I was not carrying some elaborate plan. I was genuinely, completely focused on building something good. But I also was not going to reach across 4 years of silence with money I had built from the rubble of her rejection before she had said one word about what she'd done. That's not cruelty. That's not revenge. That's just not being a fool. By year 3, ClearPath was generating $2 million in annual recurring revenue. We had expanded beyond landscaping into a whole ecosystem of small service businesses, contractors, event rental companies, mobile pet groomers, cleaning crews. We were being written up in regional business publications. We were being approached by larger companies about partnership and acquisition. Still quiet on my personal channels. Still not calling my mother. Still thinking about her. Still missing her. The version of her I always hoped was in there somewhere, underneath all the armor. Still placing my phone face up on the table sometimes when it rang, hoping it was a Columbus number. It never was. And then it was April of year 4.
Tuesday afternoon. My phone rang with a Columbus area code I didn't recognize right away. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. Ashley. One word. Her voice. 4 years and 1 word. And the word was my name, which she had given me, which she had called across playgrounds and down hallways and upstairs for the whole of my childhood. And now it came through the phone sounding older than I remembered, quieter, something in it worn down. I said, "Mom?" A beat of silence. She asked if I was well. I said I was. She said Marcus had told me I was doing, and here she paused, carefully, all right. I didn't fill the silence. She said, I need to talk to you about something. I said, okay. And she told it to me. All of it. The business loan she'd taken 3 years ago to keep things afloat, burned through. The tax debt, the vendors she owed, the commercial kitchen space she was behind on. She told it to me in her Diane voice, controlled, factual, organized even now. Even while everything was falling down around her, she organized it before she spoke it. And then she paused. And something in that pause was different from every other pause in every other conversation we'd ever had. Something had broken through. She said, I'm going to need help. Financial help. I don't ask for things. You know I don't ask for things. But I've run out of road. And then, slowly, like it cost her something she hadn't budgeted for, she said, I know things between us haven't been... I know there's been distance, but you're my daughter, and I'm hoping that counts for something. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think you might be expecting me to say I felt powerful, vindicated, like the wheel had finally turned. That is not what I felt. What I felt was sadness, this complicated, deep, old sadness. Because what I was hearing underneath all her careful words was a woman who had spent a lifetime building her identity around never needing anyone, arriving at the moment where she needed someone. And the someone she had called was the daughter she had sent away with $50 and the instruction not to come back without something to show. There was grief in her voice. Not the kind she would have named that way, she didn't have that language, but I could hear it. I could hear it because she was still my mother, and I still knew her better than she knew herself. I waited. She asked what I thought I could do. She named a number,
$40,000 to cover the most critical debts. I said, "Mom, do you know what I've been doing for the last 4 years?" A pause, longer this time. She said, "Marcus mentioned you had some kind of technology business." Some kind of. After 4 years, after everything, some kind of technology business. I breathed. And then I said, "I'd like to send you something before we talk about numbers. I want you to read it first." She said, "All right." I said, "Check your email." And I sent her the link.
Let me tell you what was in that document, because it matters. It was not a bill. It was not a list of grievances. It was not a ledger of everything she had ever said to me that had cost me something. I am not that kind of person, and I did not want to become that kind of person just because I finally had the leverage. What I sent her was ClearPath's company overview, the kind of document I had prepared for investors and strategic partners. Clean design, professional, the kind of document that spoke for itself without needing anyone to raise their voice. It opened with our logo and company name. It had a team page, 11 people, most of them from Ohio, most of them from working-class backgrounds, most of them the kind of people my mother would have dismissed with her old philosophy, people who had struggled and been overlooked and decided to build anyway. It had customer testimonials, including Beverly from Dayton, who had written a full paragraph, unprompted, about how ClearPath had let her grow her landscaping business from a 2-person operation with a binder to a team of 9 with real systems. It had our revenue numbers, our growth curve, our current valuation from the most recent funding round. And then, on the very last page, one page I had added the night before, sitting alone at my kitchen table, writing the way you write when you've been waiting a long time to say something and you finally know the right words. It was titled, How ClearPath Started. 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph described being laid off in February, flying home to Columbus, and being asked to leave my mother's house with $50 and nowhere to go. The second paragraph described sitting in the back of an Uber watching the house disappear and making a decision, registering an LLC with the last of that $50, finding a co-founder who believed in the idea, building a prototype in a borrowed space, getting a first customer who cried on the phone, and building, quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone's permission, for 4 years. The third paragraph said this: I built this company in silence, not because I was hiding, but because I needed to build it for myself first, not to prove something to someone else, not to earn a seat at any table. I built it because serving small business owners who are overlooked and undervalued felt like the truest thing I could do with what I knew. Everything in this document came from those $50 and 4 years of choosing the work over the noise. I share it now not as an argument and not as a rebuke. I share it as a simple truth. This is who I am. This is what I built. And now you know.
She read it. I know she read it because Marcus called me the next morning. His voice was different, quieter than usual. The way people get quiet when they've witnessed something shift. He said, "Ashley, what did you send Mom?" I said, "The truth." He told me she had called him at 11 o'clock at night, that she had been crying. Not sad crying, he said, the other kind. The kind that comes from something cracking open. The kind that sounds like a door you thought was sealed, finally breaking off its hinges. She called me the next afternoon. I picked up on the second ring. She didn't ask about the $40,000 again. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I owe you an apology, not a small one." And I waited, because my whole life I had watched her qualify everything, caveat everything, say, "I'm sorry, but," or "I was hard on you because," or "you have to understand that and fold the apology back into a justification for herself within the same breath. But this time,
Nothing followed. Just those words, standing on their own. I owe you an apology, not a small one. I said, I know, Mom. And we sat on the phone in silence for a moment. Not the calculating kind, not the loaded kind. Just two people on either side of something large and real, figuring out how to begin.
I'm going to tell you where we are now, because I know some of you want to know how it ends, or more accurately, how it continues, because these things don't end. They just change shape. I did help her. Not with $40,000, not as a loan on those terms. We did it differently. ClearPath's platform is genuinely built for businesses like hers, and she became a customer, at a rate I made sure she could afford. And over 6 months, we worked with her operations to stabilize and modernize the way she ran things. Her business is smaller than it was at its peak, maybe a quarter of the size. But it's sustainable now. It's hers in the real way, not just the fierce way. We are not the same as we were before all of this. We are not pretending. There are still edges. There are still conversations we approach carefully, like ground that hasn't been fully tested yet. She is learning, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that people learn when they are doing it genuinely for the first time in their 60s, that love does not have to be a performance contract, that her daughter does not need to earn her. And I am learning, slowly, imperfectly, that I can let her try, that the woman who hurt me and the woman who is trying to do better can be the same woman, and I can hold both truths at once, without one of them canceling the other out. I tell you this story because I know some of you are sitting in your own version of that kitchen right now. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a boss or a professor or a voice inside your own head that has been running your mother's lines without her knowing it. Someone has told you that your struggle is your failure. Someone has told you that you are not enough unless you're succeeding. Someone has made you feel like love is a thing you have to produce to deserve. And I want you to hear this. Really hear it, not just let it pass through. The $50 is not the end of the story. The rejection is not the verdict. That thing you've been carrying in your pocket, the idea you've been scribbling in the margins at night, the path you've been too afraid to name out loud because you're not sure anyone would believe in it, that is real. That is yours. And no one's opinion of you, not even the opinion of someone whose opinion has mattered to you your entire life, gets to decide what you build from here.
My name is Ashley Monroe. I started with $50, and I built something that can hold the weight of the truth. Thank you for listening. And listen, if you made it all the way to the end of this story, that tells me something about you. It tells me you are the kind of person who doesn't walk away when things get real. You sat with Ashley through the kitchen floor, through the $50, through 4 years of silence and building and waiting. You stayed. So do this one thing before you go. Hit that like button right now, because this story deserves to be heard by every person who has ever been told they weren't enough by someone who was supposed to love them most. And subscribe, because we have more stories coming, stories just like this one, stories about people who got knocked to the ground and built something extraordinary from that exact spot. Stories that will make you cry, make you angry, and make you believe again. You don't want to miss a single one. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll see you in the next one.